So this is our class on some gentle moves for the neck. Now I'm going to narrate for you which props I'll end up using, but you should feel totally free to use anything that you have around that will just work really simply for you. We're going to start by side lying. And in doing so, I know that I want a little bit of padding out along the floor so that when I'm on the side of my hip, it's not a distraction to me. Additionally, in side lying, we're going to want to perhaps support the head by some amount. I say perhaps because this will shake out a little bit differently for each one of us. So I'm going to start with two thickly folded blankets. I get a sense here that I'm going to end up taking one or even both of them out for a couple of moments, but I'm going to start there and see how it goes. So let's come to side lying on the right. When you come on down, as though you were, and you might be a side sleeper, accustomed to sleeping on your right, I want you to think about here pulling that right shoulder forward so it doesn't feel like it's tucked underneath you with a lot of pressure coming down into it. So that shoulder blade sneaks ahead. And then from there, that right arm can kind of go in a couple of different places. Straight out is pretty simple for me. I might occasionally bend into that elbow just to give it a reposition. We're not going to be too stringent here about other points of alignment, but I would have you get a sense that when you're in this, that you don't have your head forward of the rest of your spine. So if you find that you're cupping your upper spine forward, projecting your head forward with neck flexion, then think about here bringing that ear as though it's in line with the shoulder, the side rib, and the pelvis. And again, we don't have to be too stringent about it, but since this is going to be for the neck, we got to give it some thought from the start. All right, the first thing I want to check in with here is the ability for me to just let the weight of my head completely sink down into the support. You might use the end of a bolster, maybe you have a few cushions and pillows from your home, but having these two blankets underneath my ear feels pretty good. What we're going to start with here is a gentle pressure down to that support with the head, and I mean gentle. So when I go ahead here and begin that, I'm just going to kind of press down as though I really want to close my ear and the side of my skull into that stack of blankets. And then I'm just gonna ease off. We're gonna do that a few times. So pressing down. And if you're using something squishier like pillows or a bolster, you might feel like you can press further, but you don't have to irritate the neck. We're just beginning, and you can back off from that with a little bit of neck activation. And so I'm going to do that a few more times. I'm gently pressing down, holding it there for a couple of moments. And then very simply, I'm just going to kind of back off from that. And if you were watching on screen, you would see I'm pressing down. It's like I'm snuggling in really tight to my blankets, giving that a moment or two. And then as I back off, it's kind of like I lift up a little bit. How about a couple more? Again, not to the point of forcefulness, but just getting a sense here that the neck isn't really passive in this position. We have choices to either push down, which is a neck strengthening move. And then when we back off, it's sort of like, what was engaged? Can that relax? All right, last one, and hold it for just a little bit longer. Notice if you're also pressing your shoulders, gritting your teeth, and can you simply engage some muscles around the neck without recruiting these other nearby body parts to kind of step in and amplify? All right, and then we'll set that out. Okay, so from here, I want you to feel like this is highly adaptable and you don't have to replicate exactly what I'm doing. But I'm going to start by taking this left hand and just dropping it off along my side. And then I'm going to drop it off so that I'm putting my left palm to the floor behind my hip. And it's just sort of draping there. I'm not actively reaching or stretching. I'm just kind of seeing if I don't put a lot of arrangement into it, can I comfortably let my hand rest somewhere? Now, if your shoulder is quite restricted or your proportions prevent this from happening easily, I wonder if you couldn't take a block or even a bolster or something else and just have it as a little shelf for your hand. If you don't appreciate the sensation of that arm just kind of like dangling in midair, put a little something underneath the hand and let it get a platform. All right, so this is one start. From here, I'm going to take out one of these blankets. So having them stacked and layered and folded gives me the ability to add and subtract pretty easily. So, okay, so now I'm down to one blanket. It feels so much lower. And if you had your eyes on screen, you would have seen that my head before was pretty level to my spine, but now my head is tilting down towards the floor. I'm seeking to create that. So as I get into this, I'm not going to step away from that because I think it's not the alignment that I want. I am working towards this. However, if you in your practice feel like you take out a layer and it is just untenable to be here for very long, place that layer back in, maybe do like a half progression, do something else that's a little bit taller for you so that you're not so low. And again, with this hand behind you, I think you'd be better off having it on a little support rather than just dangling, but that's highly editable. So as I'm here for a few moments, I'm gonna keep my head and my right arm as is, just let them be. And this won't really be on camera, but I'm gonna take this left hand and kind of walk it away from me as though I'm going to reach for that baseboard that you can see at the wall that's behind my back. Yeah, and that again is to get a little bit more for the shoulder and the side of the neck. Through this part of the sequence, I'm really just trying to come up with a few different scenarios in which I think you can elicit some stretch sensation. And of course, as always and forever, you are the final arbiter of whether it is manageable. So I've had my hand behind me as though I'm reaching out for that baseboard. I'm gonna bring it in a little bit. I'm gonna check to see if I can pull this second blanket out and bring my head entirely to the floor. Okay, not so bad. I can deal with that neck stretch as my head is tipping down towards the floor. And as I stay for a little bit longer, 1 or 2 times, I might take this back left hand and just sort of take it for a walk. So reaching it for the baseboard and seeing if I can relax my neck and shoulder. Again, just a couple of scenarios in which I think it's likely that you can elicit some stretch sensation from this left shoulder, collarbone, throat, and neck. I'm going to stay here for a little bit longer. So if you're still experimenting, feel free. You've got a few more moments to consider if this is where you'd like to end up. If you found something good to work with, you might stay there. I'll make a final suggestion here as we hang out for, say, another minute, minute and a half, is that you don't have to be totally passive. With my head to the floor, I am going to press down. And here my ear is not connected. It's like the top right side of my skull. And so it's like I'm just nudging down to the ground, pressing in and then backing way off. You might try that. You might simply stay. The hand behind you could reposition, higher or lower, closer or further, straighter or more bent. And you could even here begin to turn your nose down towards the floor, any micro movement of the head. And those are my last few suggestions. I'll leave you to them. And we'll give this about another minute or half minute. I did lose count. I've got my eye on the clock now. And I might just try on a couple more small changes. Is it manageable? Can you breathe? Is it informative in sensation rather than overwhelming? All right. So I've gone pretty low. I don't have any head support. So on my way out, I think I'm just going to grab one of these blankets, just bring myself to sort of a middle ground before I come entirely off of this side and give myself a pause for a moment. Feeling pretty good. So I'm going to recruit this left hand and this right elbow to press down. And I'm going to come all the way on up and we're going to do the other side. Now, because I have this earpiece in my ear, I won't be doing it fully. So if you're looking to the screen to get guidance, it might look like I'm not quite doing everything as described, just so I don't lose that little bit of a technology out of my ear. So we're going to come here onto the left side. And again, if you are acquainted well with sleeping on your side, then you probably have a simple way to get into this. But I'd like to kind of name it so that you know it. I'm not sticking that shoulder directly underneath me, but I'm pulling that shoulder blade forward so it frees up the arm. And that's probably intuitive, but good to see the movement for what it is. That left arm can reach straight out from the shoulder. You might bend into the elbow so it's alongside whatever supports you have underneath your head. And we'll give a breath or two to this moment. And see if you can fully drape and drop the weight of your head into the support. And then after having kind of given a few slow moments to that neck and head to kind of do that convincing work, like, can't you just rest down? After a few moments of encountering that full release, whatever that means to you, we then activate lightly, because it's good to view the neck as not just needing like stretch forevermore. That could be, but there's always that component of strength building, which, you know, you might have heard me say before. That's where I put a lot of my faith in healing, is to actually tone and utilize things, not just passively pull on them. So as you're here, you're going to press that head down right into the blanket support. And it's not furious, it's not aggressive, but it's sort of like you just want to nestle and compress your ear in the side of your skull right into that support, and then back off. If you're using, again, something squishier than I am, you might feel like you could sink down, but just play it to the edge where you feel like, okay, I've turned on some neck strength. And then to be educational to the nervous system, I'm going to turn it off and go through a couple of those. You can vary how deeply you're pressing, how forcefully you're pressing. You can vary the duration of the pressure. But I would like you to kind of acquaint yourself to this action of pressing down sideways into the floor and then meeting some resistance. All right, we're going to do one more, or I'll guide one more. You can do as many more as you'd like. I'm just going to hold this one for a little bit longer. You know, that duration of time when we kind of spend a moment longer with something, it's a good moment to step back and say, what's the bigger picture? So have you recruited a jawline, clenching, grinding teeth, shoulders, are they scrunchy? Are you breath holding? Are you squeezing your thighs together instead of just letting your legs relax? All right, and then back out of any pressure you put in. So starting with my greatest amount of height, I'm then going to drop off that that's my right arm behind me. And again, if you can't get your hand to the floor and that action of just dangling the arm down feels unsafe or insecure, then place something underneath your hand, any object you have nearby. We'll give it a few inhales, a few exhales. I'm going to take that back right hand on the walk as though I'm reaching out for the wall that's at my back. And I've been here for a moment and I'm curious to see if there's the next place to go. When we call this hand back in, single blanket. And so here my head begins to tilt down towards the floor. So begins to increase the space between the side of my jaw and neck and that top right shoulder. And again, I'm going to drop this arm off behind me and be experimental about it. I can keep it close towards my hip. I can reach out for the wall. I could go with a straight arm. I could have a bent elbow. I could even come higher off the ground. All right, and I've been here for a few moments, so I'm going to take myself to my final stop in the pose. So I'm going to take out that second blanket and see, yeah, that works pretty all right. If I can bring my head all the way down to the floor, that does not denote that anyone else needs to do that same positioning. You might keep up a lot of height here and work your neck in this position. Once more, I'm going to drop off my arm behind me and go through a couple of repositions to see if I can elicit some manageable stretch sensation. I'm going to rattle off for you the couple of variables that you could play with. Of course, we know that arm can do a variety of things: closer, further, higher, lower, straighter, and more bent. And with your head on the floor, you could apply that pressure down, like you want to nudge that ridge of the skull deeper into the floor and then back off from it. I like that one, so I'm going to repeat that a few times. As I'm doing that, I'll mention again that you could sort of turn your head. You could look as though your nose towards the floor, your nose towards the ceiling. And of course, there are probably dozens of other small movements that you could create and encounter here that could be very meaningful to your neck. Can you breathe while all of this comes up? Can you step back and get that broader view, that bigger picture, and notice if your jawline has gotten tighter, if you're stifling your breath, or some other body part kind of winces when your neck is put under this tension? This is a good one for me, man. I could be here for a while and experiment. But we've been here for a bit, and I'm going to give us this last minute or so. And you could return to something you already did, go towards something we haven't covered, rummage around where we've been. All right. So I'm going to begin to plan my exit, and I've been quite low, and I want just a step in between here and coming all the way out. So I'm going to lift my head, slide that single blanket back in, and just give myself a moment to pause and to rest on the way out of town. And then with my top right hand, I've called that back in, and my bottom left elbow, I'm going to press down and begin to bring myself all the way on up. All right. So I want to do one more thing here, ground oriented. We're going to lie on our backs. I'm going to keep a blanket underneath me just for a little bit of comfort. This next one, I always suggest it from a block first and then just see what you can tolerate. So I've got these studio cork blocks. They're a little firm and I'm no glutton for punishment when it comes to neck stuff. So what I'm going to do is have it behind me, make sure you guys can see its placement. And then I'm going to give it a block cozy. I'm going to cover it with a blanket. These studio blankets are nice because they're not super, super, super thick. So if you're using something at home that's maybe like bed linens, if it's really, really thick and poofy, you might not find it super useful. So what do you have that's like a tightly woven blanket? That's what I would suggest. And what this does is basically just dull the edge of the block, because I'm going to have this back edge of the block, kind of where you can see the blanket stripes, wedged in the base of the skull at the occiput. And it's, you know, not meant to be like dreamy and Shavasana-esque. It is meant to kind of inform you about the tension that resides there, but I don't want it to be like, you know, cold sweat coming down off my brow line. So I need to make it just a little gentler. If you have cork blocks, but instead foam blocks, you might be able to do without this extra padding, but try it both ways to see what works. So I'm just going to kind of wiggle myself back a little bit. And at this moment, I have that base of the skull just over the edge of the block. And then once I have that, I'm just going to wiggle my hips around, get myself situated so that after a moment, I can let my arms go. Now, this little thing, this little torture device, really reveals how tight my neck and upper back are. If you're watching me do this, if you're watching me come in, you can see that I'm very extended in my spine. And you know, in this moment, it's not worth correcting. I'm just naming it because you might not show up in this big back bend, but I am definitely going to. So, okay, that top edge is wedged right into the base of the skull. I've made it acceptable to my nervous system by dulling the edge with some blanket. Now, the other end of the block is somewhere in between my shoulder blades. You and I are different heights and proportions, shapes and sizes, and mobilities. We've got different limitations, so it might catch you differently. But I feel this about in line with almost the bottom tips of my shoulder blades. And what I want to do here is instead of trying to endeavor to put my shoulder blades on top of the block, which also doesn't feel fantastic, I'm going to kind of wear these big, loose, wide arms. I might even internally rotate, palms coming to face down, so that my shoulder blades spread wide across my back and they're not really clipping the edges of the block. And we're going to try to stay pretty still. I'm a fidgeter, so if your eyes are on me, you'll see that I'm constantly squirming about here. That's my version of stillness. Other people, when they're still, are like statues. And as we have this, see if you can appreciate that bit of traction that has come from hooking that back ledge of the spine just over the edge of the block. Now, since I'm speaking while doing this, that little bit of jaw movement does translate into my head moving a little bit. So from time to time, I'm going to feel compelled to actually correct that connection a little bit. Now, you might find the same thing, even though you might not be wagging your jaw while you're doing this. You might find that with a couple of breaths, your back changes. You might find if you wiggle in one spot, the connection with your skull changes. So this, though I'm going to hold this here and call it a static pose, you might be moving and adapting pretty frequently while you're here. However, if there's a moment where you can just be and be fairly still, relish that moment. But if you're finding you're making many corrections, please don't assume that that is wrong. That's your nervous system trying to make sense of the world. As we stay for a few moments, I'd remind you that with the ability to re-watch this video, that you might decide that this is a good one and you want to return to this a few times and mark any progression. Like maybe the first time you do it, you are a real wiggle worm like I am. But by maybe the third or fourth time you visit this, you've kind of made your peace with it and you know where to go and what to get out of it. All right, I'm not going to keep us here so very much longer, but I'm going to give us a last couple of suggestions for mobilizing it if you want to. I'm going to walk my feet in back towards my hips, stand into those heel bones. I'm thinking like it's a baby bridge pose. And I'm envisioning here that the back of my hips, they're at the same height as the back of my skull, kind of like there's an invisible block between my sacrum and the ground. And I'm just going to rest there for a moment. That actually has reduced the amount of traction because I no longer have my spine dropping towards the floor. But as I have that, I'm going to tuck my tailbone and try to lengthen my low back. I'm going to try to drop my ribs into my abdomen and turn my tailbone under. That's a very different position from where I was a moment ago. And then with that, sort of like I'm walking in place, I'm trying to push my knees forward, kind of move my hips around a little bit, just to draw any amount of length from the base of the block to my sacrum. And then I'm going to replace my hips to the floor. I'm imagining that as I bring my hips down, they're an inch or two forward of where they were before. And then from that sense of kind of anchoring my hips forward and down, the last little mobilization I might offer here is just the gentlest, the smallest turn of the head, as though you were secretly signaling that you were saying no. Just a very gentle turn of the head. And after I make those very gentle turns, oh, I'm really barely turning my head. It's like my nose is just going by like a quarter an inch in either direction. I'm going to settle to center. Let's give it 3 last breaths. All right, so I wouldn't suggest a great big sit up to fling yourself out of this. Instead, turn to a side with your knees, bring that back arm over, and then support yourself on the way up. And then once you're upright and seated, let's do one last thing while we're sitting. Give yourself a comfortable seat. It doesn't have to be complex. I'm just going to stack up a couple of folded blankets here so I can make myself comfortable in Sukhasana, cross legs. If you like other sitting poses better, why don't you head there? You can even sit, of course, to a chair. All right, once I'm upright and sitting, checking in to see that I'm pretty comfortable in this position, I'm gonna take my right hand and bring my right fingers to my right shoulder. So it's sort of like taking that arm and tucking it into this little bird's wing and having it along the side. Now, in this position, if you find it difficult to flex your wrist and your elbow enough to that you're actually holding on to the top of your shoulder, don't worry, just keep your arm close. Or if you'd like, bring that arm behind your back. It's another way of keeping the arm sort of tucked to your side. But if you're struggling to make sense of this position, there's a great alternative with the arm behind the back. Either way, we're going to drop the left ear towards the left shoulder. And then from this, I'm going to take the pads of my left fingers, and I'm going to go to the side just in case you like the visuals for this. So I've dropped my left ear towards left shoulder away from the camera. That left hand is coming over my head. And if this again is a weird one for your shoulder, arm, pause, and I'll give you an alternative. But I'm going to see if I can put my fingers behind my right ear and sort of just underneath my hairline. And I'm going to push in. I'm not using fingernails, so I'm not flexing my knuckles so much. My nails are pressing in. I'm just holding this with my fingerprints. So behind the ear, my pinky fingers right behind my ear, and then around that hairline area. And I'm going to pull in with my fingerprints and sort of pull away from my ear, away from my shoulder. I'm gonna give this a couple of breaths. Now, if it's awkward and strange for you to reach all the way overhead one, you don't have to. You're doing great just by dropping the ear over. But you could just hold on to the top of the head, and you're definitely not pulling so much. I'm sure that's intuitive, but I just like to kind of say it so that you know that there isn't a sort of larger gain for more force here. I wish that worked. I wish we just had to pull really hard on the neck once a day and all of our neck troubles would go away. 'Tis not the case though. All right, and as you have this, you can experiment with head position. I find value in turning the head down. So I'm gonna go there and stay there for a few breaths. And again, I've got like my fingerprints, like the tackiness of my fingers against the tackiness of my neck. And I'm just pulling so that from hand on shoulder to hand behind skull, I've kind of got the top layers of my skin, my superficial fascia, but then by the positional change and the weight of tipping my head over, I'm going in a little deeper, maybe muscular layers here. Trying to give you a twofer, both superficial and deeper layers of tension. All right, so I like to come out easy peasy from these things. So I'm gonna drop my left hand down first, right hand down second, and then I'm just gonna look straight down for a moment. And then from here, I'll look up and look forward. Let's do side two. I'm gonna swap my legs. I'm gonna pivot a little bit to the side. Again, with that earpiece, if I do something that's a little bit off from what I'm saying, it's just so that I don't pop that silly thing out. So you can either take your left hand to your left shoulder, if that's a funny one for you, because of elbow and wrist flexion limitations, no big deal. You're certainly not the only one. That arm can just come behind your back and you might just like that one better. So go for it. It's just two methods of kind of keeping your arm tucked towards your side. And then once you have that, you're going to drop right ear towards right shoulder. And from here, I'm going to reach kind of over a little bit behind my head. My right pinky finger is behind my left ear. My fingerprints are kind of scooping into the skin on the back and side of my neck. And then with my hand on shoulder, hand on neck, I'm sort of like drawing those fingers away from each other. Alternately, if it's awkward and strange to try to reach that part of your head with the opposite hand, what about having a simple fingertip grip on the side of your skull? And again, more is not more here. So you're just adding weight and traction, tension having a good connotation here, meaning you're pulling on something. And then what sort of reposition of the head would be interesting? I'm going to go straight towards turning my nose down because that one feels meaningful to me. Think about sitting up well through the pose, even if there's a lot of crooked, sideways, turning, pulling here. Can you keep some good stuff with your posture? This, just let's file this under stretching. This stretch is a good one to revisit throughout the day. Again, I wish that if I had the magic stretch for everyone's neck issues, I would have given it to you. I wouldn't hold back on you. But there really isn't one. It's really about integrating a lot of things throughout the day, not just our tech neck. So throw this one into a long afternoon of being in front of a computer, a morning where you are in a chair a lot, maybe even in the middle of an evening where you might just be relaxing, reading or watching something on television. Find some time here just to do this little bit of work. So I'm going to take out my right hand first, left hand second, and then we're just going to swivel. So I'm looking straight on down. And then from here, I'll lift my head and I'll say thank you for signing on for this class. Repeat them, find your favorite ones, do them a couple more times. And I hope this takes care of your neck in a nice way.